Give a hand to Alex Chin.
Hi, I'm Alex Chin, and I'm going to talk to you about why your website isn't as accessible as you think it is. So my name's Alex Chin, and I'm a front-end developer at Blog11, and we're a blog reader, so accessibility of our content to our users is really important to us, and I hope it is to you guys too. And today we're going to talk about why accessibility on the web is important and how to make our websites more accessible. The power of the web is in its universality. Access by everyone, regardless of disability, is an essential aspect. Tim Berners-Lee said that. So why does accessibility matter? As he said, the power of the web is in its universality, and the web is fundamentally designed to work for all people, whatever their hardware, their software, their language, their culture, their location, or their physical or mental abilities. And it's essential that the web be accessible to all in order to provide equal access and equal opportunity to people with different abilities. So access to the web is a basic human right, but it's also good for you too. There's a serious business case for accessibility. It overlaps with other best practices such as like mobile design, device independence, design for older users, search, engine optimizations, and accessible websites just have better search results and increased audience reach. So who should your website be accessible to? People with disabilities, and that includes people with hearing disabilities, people with cognitive disabilities, and that includes learning disabilities, autism, memory impairment, perceptual disabilities, seizure disorders, people with physical disabilities like people with missing limbs, quadriplegics, people with arthritis, people with reduced dexterity, people who suffer from tremors, people who suffer from repetitive stress injury, like a lot of us probably do and will, people who suffer from speech disabilities like muteness or stuttering, and people who suffer from visual disabilities like color blindness, poor vision, or complete blindness. But your website should also be accessible to older people, people with low bandwidth connections, people who use older technologies, people with low literacy, people who aren't fluent in the language of your website, and mobile users. But for the purpose of this talk, we're just going to concentrate on people with disabilities and the elderly, and how they use the web and how we can make it more accessible to them. So we make a lot of assumptions about our users when we write websites, and they don't all look like this. Some common assumptions we make are that they have perfect sight, that they even have sight, that they have hearing abilities, that they are going to give us mouse input, and maybe that they're going to even give us keyboard input. And that's not necessarily true for all our users. And there are a lot of accessible technologies now to like help our special needs users. Like, for example, keyboard access. A lot of websites allow you to have like all the functionality you would normally have a mouse, only with the keyboard. There are some screen readers for the like cognitive impaired and the visually impaired. I'm going to show you a quick example of me trying to read the New York Times with a screen reader. Oh, my bad.
Breaking news, world news and multimedia window, sections button, search button, internal link, list one item, link, end of list, login button, settings button.
So I get
US, link, end of list.
I get pretty annoyed pretty quickly, so I like speed through a lot of these. But this is how like a blind user would read the New York Times.
Link, end of list. Leaving group landmark, entering main landmark, frame 2. Heading level 2, top news. Heading level 2 link. U.S. Attorney warns Cuomo on ethics investigation. By Suzanne Craig, Thomas.
Okay, so this technology is like pretty cool, and a lot of people are working on it now, but it's still obviously not perfect. And this was, by the way, VoiceOver, which is like the default screen reader on a MacBook. There's also been a lot of progress in speech recognition for people who don't have access to a keyboard. You guys all use Siri probably, or have heard of it. Customizable UIs are really important for making the fonts larger, for it to be easier to read for people who don't have great sight, or changing the contrast or color scheme if you're colorblind. Captioning is really important for like video content or like sound bites. And haptics, which is basically vibrational feedback when you like make an action. That's really popular in video games, and people use it to learn Braille. So like all these technologies are being like developed right now, and they're really awesome, but we need to make sure that our websites can interact with them. So how can we build websites that work with these technologies? So a good first step is to look at the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines as specified by the World Wide Web Foundation. And they're basically a list of principles that you should adhere to in order to make your site compatible with these technologies. So there are 4, and we're going to talk about all of them. Your content needs to be perceivable, operable, understandable, and robust. So what does it mean for your content to be perceivable? It means it should be able to be consumed by all users regardless of disability. So how do we make it perceivable by all? There are a few really easy steps to make your site way more perceivable to people with disabilities. So number 1, and it's really important, is you need to provide text alternatives for non-text content. For example, images. So this is like one of the biggest website fails when it comes to accessibility, like images without alt tags. So if a screen reader tries to read an image that doesn't have an alt tag, it'll just read the file name, and sometimes those are like super crazy, and listening to them through a screen reader is awful. So if you want, so please always specify an alt tag, and if you want the screen reader to ignore the image, it can be blank, and if you don't want it to ignore the image, give it like a meaningful description. Same with input fields. This is also a really easy win. Always label your input fields. It makes a huge difference to screen readers when you do that. Otherwise, like images and forms are almost like unperceivable by disabled users. Oh, so this is going to be like a little demo of what can go wrong when you don't adhere to these rules. So we can see in this code there's like an image with no alt tag and like input fields with no labels.
cat underline, Wavir Derv 123R34 VSASXASD.jpg image. Edit text, blank. Edit text, blank. Send button.
So even though there's like placeholder text in those fields, so like I can see with my eyes that I need to enter a username and a password, like someone using the screen reader wouldn't be able to tell that, and hearing that image name was really not useful. So other content we need to provide text alternatives for, like time-based media, for example, videos and sound bites. I talked about those before. Transcripts and captions are good. So CAPTCHA, we all know what CAPTCHA is. I don't know how many people are still like using CAPTCHA that much, but they're basically kind of impossible to decipher unless you have really great eyesight. And there's also now like a sort of alternative for people with poor eyesight or no sight at all, but they're also really bad. So
please enter the following. T I E A M N O N O C E A N U N.
Okay, I didn't understand any of that. I'm pretty sure no one could ever. So there's a lot of progress to be made there. And lastly, we need to make sure to handle decorative and invisible content. So we can signify to the screen reader or other accessible technology that is reading our site that we don't want this content to be read to the user with an ARIA hidden attribute. And so this content won't be read to the user. And ARIA is really powerful. It stands for Accessible Rich Internet Application Specification. And I'm not going to talk about it too much because Marcy Sutton is going to go into more detail tomorrow. But it's really powerful, and it provides a way to add the missing semantics needed to assistive technologies. It's really awesome. So back to making our site perceivable. We need to make sure our content is adaptable. And what does that mean? It means that our content should be able to be presented in different ways without losing information or structure. So it means using semantic HTML, which basically means use header tags when it's a header. Headers are super important when using a screen reader to navigate. Same goes for buttons. Don't use spans or divs or A tags. Use a button tag if it's a button. That really goes a really long way when it comes to screen readers. And you can style it any way you want. There's no reason not to do this. Having a meaningful sequence in your content is really important. Your DOM structure should reflect the way you want your content to be read so that the assistive technology can go through it the way that you want it to go through it. So in this case, the New York Times does it pretty well. And lastly, be mindful of sensory characteristics, which basically means you can't assume that your reader, or your user rather, can comprehend shapes and colors the way most people do. So if you're using a right arrow to signify this is a next button, your user with a cognitive disability might not be able to understand that. Same for a colorblind user. So you need to be really explicit and be mindful of sensory characteristics. Lastly, in order for our content to be perceivable, we need to make sure that it's distinguishable. And this just basically means be mindful of your use of color, of contrast, and don't use images of text. Just use text. And this website breaks all those rules. So now that we've gone over how to make our website perceivable, let's make it operable. And what does it mean? It means that the user interface components and navigation need to be operable by assisted technologies. And how do we ensure that? We need to make sure that all the functionality is available from a keyboard. And modern browsers are pretty good at that. I can usually navigate a page pretty easily with up-down arrows and spacebar and the tab key to cycle through links. But some more complicated apps take it a step further and have hotkeys and allow you to have almost, if not all, the functionality that you would have with a mouse, like GitHub or Gmail, and that's really awesome. You have to give your users enough time to consume the content that's on your page. So if you have any timed actions or interactions, you need to be mindful of that. Please don't have any seizure-inducing content. That seems obvious, but it's not always. And this is really important. Your website needs to be navigable, which means that you need to provide a way for a user to navigate the content with the assisted technology, and they have to be able to know where they are at any time. And you can do that really easily with page titles and with focus order that makes sense, and with link purpose, which basically means that you should be able to determine the purpose of your link when you're reading it, and that's usually pretty easy because there's usually description that goes along with the link, and again, using proper headings and labels. Cool. So we've gone over how to make a website perceivable and operable, and now we have to make it understandable, and that's trickier because I think it's harder to apply this to everyone. So making a site understandable just basically means making it readable and understandable to all. And that involves, we talked about localization earlier, that involves, when possible, displaying your site in the language of the user. And that's really easy to do that now, so we should. Not using any unusual words or abbreviations. Like, I'm pretty sure my mom doesn't know what YOLO means, so I wouldn't necessarily use that in my website. Your website needs to be predictable. And that's kind of hard. But basically what it means is it should behave in a predictable way so that the user knows how to navigate it, perhaps intrinsically, or is able to learn it easily. And that means that your site should respond accurately to on-focus and on-input events, and should have consistent navigation within your site and relative to, normalcy on the web and common sense. And it should also have consistent identification for the elements on your page, which basically means, like, if I'm on Twitter and I click a follow button, like, I know it's always going to do the same thing. It's going to follow someone. Input assistance is key to understandability, and you can do a lot with this. It has to do with error identification, so signifying to the user when he or she has made an error, like filling out a form incorrectly, giving valid and clear instructions, that's really important. And even error suggestion, which Google Search does really well. These go a long way with assistive technologies. So now that we know how to make our page perceivable, operable, and understandable, lastly, we need to make sure it's robust. And what does that mean? It means basically that it needs to be compatible. The content needs to be robust enough that it can be compatible with most, if not all, user agents that are current and in the future, and that includes these guys, and it includes assistive technologies. And this might be the most important part. And ARIA is a really big part of this, and I know Marcy's going to talk about it tomorrow. So those are the 4 rules to making your websites accessible to people with disabilities and the elderly, and people who, most people don't put a lot of thought into how they use the web a lot of the time, and it's important for us to do that. So now that we've heard all this, how accessible is your website? Even though we've made a lot of progress with assistive technologies, the state of most of the internet when it comes to accessibility is pretty dire. Most websites don't adhere to any of these principles, except for maybe the big ones. Google's really big in accessibility. They're awesome when it comes to that. But if we want to build a web where everyone feels welcome and where everyone can have access to information, these are all really important things to think about. And I hope that you guys will think about them more after this talk. So I'm going to leave you with a few awesome tools to help make your websites more accessible. Chromevox is a really cool Google extension. It's their screen reader for Chrome. It's great for testing the accessibility of your site. There are a lot of accessibility checkers. Oh, this is Chromevox. There are a lot of accessibility checkers like Wave. You just enter the URL of your site, and it'll generate a report for you with all the errors and what you could improve. Some cool libraries like Quail that'll help you figure out how accessible your site is. And you should go here to read more. And that's me. Thank you.